Across the American West and Southwest, great cities have risen in places that nature never meant to hold so many people, glittering metropolises built in deserts and dry valleys, sustained by water carried from far away or pumped from deep beneath the ground. For generations, these cities grew in confidence, trusting that the water would always be there, that the rivers and the reservoirs and the aquifers that fed them would never fail. But that confidence is now being tested, for the water on which these cities depend is running out, diminishing year after year under the pressure of drought, a warming climate, and relentless demand. Some of the largest and fastest growing cities in the nation now face a future in which the water that made them possible can no longer be taken for granted. This is the story of 5 American cities that depend on water that is running out, and of what their struggle tells us about the future of life in a drying land. Before we begin, one honest word about what all of this means. To say these cities depend on water that is running out does not mean their taps are about to run dry or that they are about to be abandoned. It means the sources they rely upon are shrinking, that the security they long enjoyed can no longer be assumed, and that they face real and growing challenges in securing the water their people need. Understanding which cities are most exposed and why is the key to understanding the true shape of the water crisis in America, and that understanding is what this video is here to provide. Real quick before we go further, a lot of people watch these all the way to the end, genuinely enjoy them, and forget the one small thing that keeps a small channel like ours alive: hitting subscribe. It is honestly important right now. Our sub rate is low and every single tap makes a real difference. So if you are finding this valuable, please subscribe right now. It takes 1 second and costs you nothing. And drop the name of your city in the comments so we can see who is watching. All right, let's begin. Why these cities are so exposed before we visit the 5 cities. It helps to understand why cities in this part of the country are so exposed to the running out of their water, because they share a common vulnerability that sets them apart from cities in wetter regions. These are cities built in dry places, where the local rainfall is far too little to support their large populations, so that they must reach out for water. Drawing it from distant rivers through great aqueducts, storing it in reservoirs, or pumping it from aquifers deep beneath the ground. This dependence on a small number of hard-pressed sources rather than on abundant local rainfall is the root of their vulnerability, for when those sources decline, the cities have little to fall back upon. The forces drawing down these sources are the same across the region. The warming climate is shrinking the mountain snowpack that feeds the rivers, causing more evaporation from the reservoirs and the soil, and intensifying the droughts that periodically grip the land. The great rivers that supply many of these cities are carrying less water than they once did, and the reservoirs that store it have fallen to alarming levels. The aquifers that some of these cities pump have been drawn down faster than they can be replenished, the water table falling and the underground stores dwindling. And the demand keeps rising as these cities are among the fastest growing in the nation, adding people and pressing ever harder on supplies that were never generous to begin with. Together, these forces have put the water of these desert cities at risk, and the 5 we are about to visit are among those where the running out of the water is felt most acutely. The first city, Las Vegas. We begin with Las Vegas, the dazzling desert city that has become a symbol of both human audacity and water vulnerability, for it has grown into a sprawling metropolis in one of the driest places in the country, while depending almost entirely on a single shrinking source. Las Vegas draws the overwhelming majority of its water from a great reservoir on the Colorado River. A reservoir that has fallen dramatically in recent years as drought and warming have diminished the river and as demand across the region has stayed high. The city watches the level of that reservoir with anxious attention, for its fortunes are tied to a body of water that has been declining toward levels once thought impossible. What makes Las Vegas remarkable is not only its vulnerability but its response, for the city has become one of the world's leaders in water conservation, driven by the stark reality of its dependence. It has torn out vast areas of thirsty grass, recycled its water on an enormous scale, returning nearly all the water used indoors to the source to be used again, and imposed strict limits on waste, so that it has managed to reduce its total water use even as its population has grown. This determined effort has given Las Vegas a measure of resilience, and it stands as proof that a city can do a great deal to stretch a shrinking supply. But even the most aggressive conservation cannot create water that is not there, and Las Vegas remains dependent on a reservoir that continues to fall. So that its future security rests on the fate of the Colorado River and on the difficult negotiations over how its shrinking water is shared. There is a particular lesson in the way Las Vegas has drawn a sharp line between the water it uses indoors and the water it uses outside. Nearly all the water that goes down a drain inside a home or a business in the city is captured, cleaned, and returned to the source so that it can be counted again and used again, which means that indoor use, however large, places relatively little permanent demand on the supply. It is the outdoor use, the water sprayed on lawns and lost to the desert air, that truly disappears, and this is precisely where the city has focused its efforts, paying residents to remove grass, banning it in new developments, and reshaping the very landscape of the city toward one that belongs in the desert. This insight that not all water use is equal and that the water lost forever is the water that matters most has allowed Las Vegas to grow while shrinking its true demand, and it is a model that other cities are studying closely as they confront their own shortages. Las Vegas shows both the peril of depending on a single running out source and the remarkable lengths to which a city can go to protect itself, and its story is a warning and an inspiration at once. Quick question I would genuinely love your take on, and it takes 10 seconds. Did you know that Las Vegas, of all places, is actually one of the best in the world at saving water? Drop a yes or a no in the comments, because your answers help me understand what surprises people most, and I read every single reply. Okay, back to the cities. The second city, Phoenix, our second city, is Phoenix, the vast metropolis of the Arizona desert, one of the largest and fastest growing cities in the nation, built in a place of extreme heat and little rain, and dependent on water that is under serious and growing pressure. Phoenix draws its water from several sources, from the Colorado River carried across the desert through a great canal, from rivers that rise in the mountains of the state, and from groundwater pumped from beneath the valley. Each of these sources is under strain. The Colorado is in decline, and Arizona holds a junior position in the sharing of its water, meaning the state is among the first to face cuts when the river falls short, so that Phoenix is especially exposed to the shrinking of the river. The groundwater beneath Phoenix, long drawn upon to supplement the rivers, has been depleted in many areas. And while the state has taken steps to manage it more carefully, the underground reserve is not limitless, and the pressure on it grows as the surface water tightens. Phoenix has done much to prepare, storing water underground in the wet years, investing in conservation, and planning carefully for a drier future, and it is far from helpless. But the sheer scale of its growth, the intensity of its heat, and the pressure on all of its sources at once make it one of the cities where the running out of the water is most keenly felt. The junior standing of Arizona in the sharing of the Colorado deserves special emphasis, for it places Phoenix in an unusually precarious position. When the great agreements dividing the river were made, priorities were assigned, and Arizona, in securing the funding to build the canal that carries the water to Phoenix, accepted a lower priority than some of its neighbors, meaning that in times of shortage, its deliveries are reduced before theirs. This arrangement was a gamble made in an era of confidence, when few imagined the river would fall as far as it has, and now that the river is shrinking, the gamble weighs heavily, for it means the water carried to Phoenix through that great canal is among the first to be cut when the reservoirs drop. The city has responded by banking water underground during the wetter years, storing reserves against the lean times, and by planning with unusual care. But the fundamental vulnerability remains, and it shapes every decision the city makes about its growth and its future. What happens to Phoenix as the Colorado declines and the groundwater dwindles will be a crucial test of whether a great desert city can secure its water in an age of shrinking supplies, and its struggle is watched closely as a preview of what other growing cities in dry regions may face. Quick pause, because this part matters, and it deserves to be seen by more people. If you are getting real value from this, tap the like button. It genuinely helps the video reach others who care about where their water comes from. And if you have family or friends in any of these cities, share this with them, because it honestly matters that the people who depend on this water understand what is happening to it. One like, one share to someone in your family, and let's keep going. The third city, El Paso, our third city, takes us to El Paso, the desert city on the far western edge of Texas, a place of extraordinary aridity that has become a model for how a city can survive on the thinnest of margins through ingenuity and foresight. El Paso sits in the Chihuahuan Desert, one of the driest inhabited places in the country, and it depends on a combination of a great river that forms the border, the groundwater and the aquifers beneath it, and increasingly on water reclaimed and purified from unconventional sources. The river that supplies part of its water is subject to drought and to the demands of many users upstream, so that in dry years its contribution can shrink dramatically, throwing the city back upon its groundwater and its ingenuity. Faced with such a precarious supply, El Paso has become a pioneer in stretching every drop, investing heavily in conservation, in the recycling of water, and in the removal of salt from brackish groundwater, building one of the largest inland desalination plants in the world to turn otherwise unusable salty water into a drinkable supply. The city has planned decades ahead, developing new sources and even preparing to purify wastewater directly back into drinking water, a measure of how seriously it takes the running out of its traditional supplies. El Paso's story is one of a city that has confronted its water vulnerability head-on and has become, out of necessity, one of the most water-wise cities in the nation. Yet even with all its ingenuity, El Paso remains a desert city dependent on sources that are limited and under pressure, and its ongoing struggle to secure its water is a testament to both the possibilities and the limits of human adaptation in an arid land. El Paso proves how far foresight can carry a city, even as it reminds us that no amount of cleverness can escape the fundamental scarcity of water in the desert. Perhaps the most striking thing about El Paso is how early it began to plan, recognizing decades ago that its traditional supplies could not sustain its growth and setting to work on solutions long before the crisis became acute. This foresight has given the city time to build its unconventional sources gradually and carefully, rather than scrambling in an emergency, and it stands as a powerful example of the value of acting before the water runs short rather than after. Cities that wait until the shortage is upon them find their choices narrowed and their costs multiplied, while a city like El Paso, which prepared in advance, has preserved a measure of flexibility that its more complacent peers may come to envy. The fourth city, Albuquerque, our fourth city is Albuquerque, the largest city of New Mexico, set in the high desert along a great river, a city that learned the hard way about the limits of its water and that has worked to change its course before it was too late. For much of its history, Albuquerque believed it sat atop an enormous and inexhaustible supply of groundwater, and it pumped freely from the aquifer beneath it, growing in the confidence that the underground water would never fail. But that belief proved mistaken, for the aquifer was far smaller and more slowly replenished than had been thought. And the heavy pumping caused the water table to fall, awakening the city to the danger that it was drawing down its groundwater toward exhaustion. Confronted with this alarming discovery, Albuquerque changed its ways, working to reduce its reliance on the aquifer and to shift toward using the water of the great river that runs through it. Water carried in part from the mountains through a system of diversion. It invested in conservation, dramatically reducing the amount of water each resident uses, and it worked to let the depleted aquifer recover by pumping less from it and using it as a reserve for the dry times rather than as the everyday source. This turn toward sustainability has improved Albuquerque's situation. But the city remains in a precarious position, for the river it now leans upon is itself subject to drought and to the warming that shrinks the mountain snows that feed it, and in the driest years the river can dwindle alarmingly, throwing the city back upon its recovering aquifer. Albuquerque's story is one of a city that recognized the running out of its water in time to act. And that has worked to secure a more sustainable future, but that still lives on a thin margin in a drying region, its security dependent on a river and an aquifer, both vulnerable to the deepening dryness of the age. All right, I know this is the second time I am bringing this up. You can roll your eyes at me. But honestly, if you have made it this deep into a video about America's water, you clearly care about this stuff, and a lot of you watching still have not subscribed. I am not going to make you feel bad about it, but that one tap genuinely tips the scales for a small channel fighting a low sub rate. It really does matter to us. That is the last time I will ask. Promise, let's finish. The fifth city, Los Angeles, our fifth and final city, is Los Angeles, the vast metropolis of Southern California, a city that outgrew its local water more than a century ago and reached out across enormous distances to bring in the water it needed, and that now faces growing pressure on every one of its far-flung sources. Los Angeles is a marvel of engineering, sustained by water carried hundreds of miles from the mountains to the east from the north of the state. and from the Colorado River, an audacious system that made possible the growth of one of the largest cities in the world in a place with little water of its own. But this dependence on distant sources has always made Los Angeles vulnerable, reliant on supplies it does not control and that pass through regions far away. Now, every one of those sources is under strain at once. The Colorado is in decline, the water from the north is stressed by drought and by the challenges of the delta through which it passes, and the eastern sources face their own pressures and their own painful histories. Los Angeles has responded with major investments in conservation, in recycling water, in capturing the storm water that once ran wasted to the sea, and in reducing its reliance on any single source, recognizing that its security depends on using less and diversifying more. The city has made real progress, and its determined efforts have improved its resilience. But the sheer scale of its needs and the simultaneous strain on all of its imported supplies keep Los Angeles among the cities where the running out of the water is a pressing concern. Los Angeles reminds us that even the greatest and most resourceful of cities, one that reshaped the map of the West to bring itself water, must now reckon with the tightening of the very supplies that made it possible, and its struggle to secure its water is a defining challenge of its future. What these cities are telling us, having visited all 5 cities, Las Vegas, Phoenix, El Paso, Albuquerque, and Los Angeles, we can step back and consider what they are telling us together, for their stories, though each is distinct, share common threads that reveal the deeper pattern of the water crisis. The first lesson is that these cities are exposed because they depend on a small number of hard-pressed sources rather than on abundant local rainfall, so that when the rivers, the reservoirs, and the aquifers decline, they have little to fall back upon. Built in dry places and sustained by water brought from afar or pumped from below, they are uniquely vulnerable to the shrinking of the supplies that made them possible. The second lesson, however, is one of hope as much as concern, for every one of these cities has responded to the running out of its water with determination and ingenuity, and their efforts show that a great deal can be done to stretch a shrinking supply. Las Vegas has become a world leader in conservation. El Paso has pioneered desalination and recycling. Albuquerque has turned back from the overuse of its aquifer, and Los Angeles and Phoenix have invested heavily in diversifying and securing their supplies. These cities demonstrate that the running out of the water, serious as it is, need not spell doom, provided they act with foresight and resolve. Yet they also remind us that no amount of cleverness can create water that is not there, and that their security ultimately depends on the fate of the rivers, the reservoirs, and the aquifers on which they draw, all of which are under pressure from a warming climate and a growing demand. What happens to these cities will depend on the choices they make, on how well they conserve, diversify, and prepare, and on whether the region as a whole can bring its use of water into balance with the shrinking supply. These 5 cities depend on water that is running out, and their struggle is a warning and a guide for the many other places that may one day face the same reckoning. For they are the front line of a crisis that is reshaping what it means to build and sustain a city in a drying land. Their story is still being written, and the wisdom and the will they bring to the task will determine whether these great cities can secure their water for the generations to come. What they decide and how boldly they act will echo far beyond their own borders, offering either a warning or a hopeful model to every city that must learn